Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Philanthropy Club of Chicago. I'm Jackie Davidoff, Principal and Chief Potential Officer of Davidoff Strategy. And I'm so excited. We are all so excited to welcome you here. We're here with Jessica Dudley of Bold Ventures. Why don't you all wave when you get your name? Joanne Harris of the CDC Foundation, Christy Uchida with the Brinson Foundation, and Rachel Maruzars with Sinai Chicago. And we also want to thank Forefront for hosting us and stewarding the Philanthropy Club, and in particular, shout out to Key Montgomery, who is really making this all possible behind the scenes. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with broad strokes. What are we doing here together? I want to share a little bit of the flow so you know what's coming. So we're going to start by having the panelists introduce themselves and sharing a little bit about their background, how they got to philanthropy and nonprofit work, and how they relate to this topic. So you will start to get to know them. And then I'm going to share a little bit about some context, because you hear this word emotional intelligence a lot. And I think many people don't have a really clear understanding about what it is and what it means to increase it and to be on a continual journey and adventure of consciously developing yourself and your potential. And then we're going to have some questions. I'll field some questions that we talked about during our planning meeting. And then we want to have about 15 or 20 minutes at the end for you all to ask your questions, because it's really important that you all get a chance to talk, so to speak, with the panelists and them to you. So before we start, I want to add one more thing, which is that we really want you all to be using this time to increase your emotional intelligence. And while we can't hear from you directly, we can use what we have, which is the chat. So at certain points during the meeting, I'm going to say, I might invite you to check in with yourself about what feeling or feelings you may be having. And, from my perspective, the 5 basic feelings, you may want to write this down, we'll put them in the chat, are fear, hurt, anger, joy, and sadness. And then there's a lot of feelings that are combinations of those, like excitement. So I'm also going to have you use the chat to reflect on, I want you to be listening for what are you getting from what the panelists are saying? How are you relating to this? What are you seeing for yourself? So let's start with the practice. So go ahead and put in the chat, what is the emotion or emotions that you're feeling right now? And you'll hear from the panelists how they relate to this, and a little bit more specifically about the function of emotions in their work, in their mission, in their leadership, and their contribution. So I'm hoping, going to look at the chat, we see some emotions going. So, okay, good. Oh, thank you, Joanne. This is awesome. Okay, love it already. I'm feeling joy that you all are participating and using this well so far. Okay, great. So let's start. Jessica, I'm going to start with you. Would you share a little bit about who you are, how you came to this, what's your perspective on all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for facilitating this conversation, and to the Philanthropy Club and Forefront for hosting us. It's exciting to get to be a part of this conversation with other folks who have really reflected on this. So excited to be in this. So for those of you I haven't gotten the chance to meet, I'm Jessica Dudley. I came to philanthropy after about 10 years in the public health sector. So I spent the first 10 years of my career in direct service, primarily focused on reproductive health and working with young folks around identifying sort of reproductive health, understanding their identity, both in Chicago and overseas, and then made a pretty decisive left turn into philanthropy. I had an opportunity to join the Joyce Foundation, and I was a program officer there in gun violence prevention and justice reform. Then really decided that where my passion lied in this work and in understanding this work was in strategy development. And so I moved over to Arabella Advisors and spent a few years there with a real focus on thinking about how you develop strategies for DEI and philanthropy, and what it meant to sort of harness the movement and the work that was happening in community to really shift funding to look differently. And then most recently this year, I left Arabella and started my own independent consulting practice where I'm really focused on embedding racial equity into the work of philanthropy. So moving that out of the hands of individuals where it often lies in foundations and really thinking about how you embed that work throughout a foundation, which means really changing the way decision making looks. So thinking about what grant making and governance design looks like to really make sure that it's an embedded practice in the work. And so for me, a lot of the reflective work, and I know we're going to go deeper in this today, but has really been that transition from Grantseeker to Grantmaker and understanding sort of the emotional quality of that work and how it really influenced the way I decided to come into the work of philanthropy and change the way I entered conversations with folks.
Thank you, Jessica. All right, Jawan, how about you?
All right. I just want to echo Jessica's thanks and gratitude to you, Jackie, Forefront, and all those that are working to pull today's conversation off. So when I was thinking about my intro, I was reminded that I was actually raised by a philanthropist. My grandmother, rural Eastern North Carolina, I spent a lot of my childhood with my grandmother and other family members. But just watching her move about in the community was really, really informative in ways that I didn't even think about until later in my career, where I got into institutional philanthropy. But I was just always, she passed a few years ago, but at her funeral, there were many stories of young people who were essentially listened to by her. And so they would name their desires and then she would make it happen. She would get all the resources needed to send them to Disney World or whatnot. But I think that sequence of listening and then doing the work that's informed by community, I think is something that I've taken with me all throughout my career. So also, like Jessica, I have a background in public health. I've spent most of my career working around the social determinants of health, and I include my first couple years of teaching high school science in the realm of public health. But as I was teaching, I realized that there were some more upstream things that I wanted to work on, and so decided to focus specifically on public health. And then after working in this field for a while, I stumbled upon institutional philanthropy. Had no clue what it was, still kind of don't. But I found my way and did a lot of interesting work, and actually found myself tapping into my emotional intelligence in that work. And a lot of the way that showed up, and I know we'll probably get into this later, but a lot of the way that showed up is, honestly, it got into racial equity work and having a deeper sense of who I am. I remember telling a colleague that I've never felt Blacker and gayer in my whole life than when I entered institutional philanthropy. So it kept me sane. It still continues to keep me sane and focus on what I need to get to grow, and then letting me know when I need to move on too. So up there.
Thanks, Jawan. Let's see, let's go to Christy.
Thanks. Of course, also want to say thank you to Forefront and the Philanthropy Club, to Jackie for organizing us. It's so nice to be here with you all this morning. So maybe similar to some other panelists, my career also has transitioned from being a grant seeker to being a grant maker. So after business school, I mostly ended up in nonprofit work, so about 10 years in arts organizations here in Chicago, including places like Writers Theater, and then I was at Red Moon Theater when I made the biggest leap in my career to go from Red Moon, small grassroots organization, to Boeing, the airplane manufacturer, in their corporate social responsibility kind of function. At the time, it was called Global Corporate Citizenship. And I was there for about 5 years, and then moved laterally to Brinson, the family foundation that I'm at now. And I was a senior program officer here at Brinson for about 8 years. And then about 1.5 years ago, our longtime president retired and I became the president. So the way this relates to emotional intelligence, I think, is the connections that I've tried to foster and maintain with colleagues throughout my career, and they have been pivotal for my career. I mean, I have been very fortunate. I've been lucky more than once in my career, but it is the relationships and the network that have allowed me to make those moves. So just quickly at Boeing, the woman who hired me was on the board at Red Moon Theater. So, she had encouraged me to apply for that job. Like I wouldn't even have known it was open. The woman who had been the program officer here at Brinson before me, she had been my program officer when I was at Red Moon, and she was at a different family foundation. We kept in touch. Again, this position, it was not posted publicly. She encouraged me to apply. And so, I think that those kinds of contacts and connections, and as Jackie will talk some about, going beyond this kind of transactional nature that often occurs between grant makers and grant seekers, has certainly been really relevant in my career.
It's great. Thanks, Christy. Okay, Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Maruzars. I'm Vice President of Development and Chief Development Officer at Sinai Chicago, which is Chicago's largest nonprofit safety net healthcare system. And I have not moved from Grantseeker to Grantmaker for close to 2 decades. I have been a proud fundraiser and a grant seeker working with foundations, corporations, individual donors. And my lens is that of being an individual who has really dedicated, especially the last 12 to 15 years of my career and my development, to building my own ability to be with my emotions and learn about emotions in such a way that it helps me take greater risks as a fundraiser. It helps me build greater rapport with my donors, with my colleagues, with my board. And my lens has really been that of my own individual journey of building my emotional intelligence. I've been fortunate to have opportunities through leadership training, through various coaching and courses, ultimately leading into pursuing a master's and then a doctoral degree in transformational leadership and coaching, where my dissertation really looked at what it means to be an individual and a leader in the nonprofit sector who's taking responsibility for our satisfaction, our impact, and developing our emotional intelligence. With that said, I'm a continual student in this area. I look at the implications of this all the time, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of this panel, both because I have such great respect for everybody who's with me on the panel and everyone that I've seen on the list of attendees that I've gotten to work with, and also because this topic is just so important to me. And I really believe it's important, especially for those of us who are fundraisers, as we work to build really strong relationships with our donors and really sustain ourselves.
That's great. Thank you so much, Rachel, and everybody. So now we're gonna center ourselves a little bit around what it is that we're talking about. We look at this as this is really about your potential, your capacity to continually learn and grow so that you can lead and further the missions of the organizations, the communities that matter to you. So it is really looking at seeing yourself as I am always moving from where I am now to who I can become to be of greater service. And to understand that if I am not in these thoughts and reflections about myself, I'm really just staying sort of in a habitual way of repeating myself. And we are all made up of habits, and we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. And so the work really is to recognize if I don't actively disrupt my system, I'm never going to become and contribute in the way that I deeply seek to. So I want you all to be with that starting point. So, another piece of why I think this is so important and why I wanted to focus on this topic is that a lot of people look externally for a sense of I'm important, I'm contributing, I matter. You look at your salary, your promotions, whatever new, grants that you're making or seeking. And I really believe that there's a whole universe that we really need to be looking at that's often not reflected on. That's about the internal landscape. Are you aware of who you are as you're making those grants or providing grants? Are you seeing yourself as a fluid being who has the capacity to intentionally move yourself forward and discover more about who you are? So that's why this is so important. Internal growth is really key to your ability to contribute and to not just be a static entity that's comfortable with who you are now, but in our language, being continually and constructively dissatisfied and always looking for, there's more for me here. I have more I can contribute. I have more I can learn about myself. I have more ways that I can connect with Jessica, for instance, if I bring more of myself and who I am instead of being someone who I think other people think I should be. And we're all in this. Okay, cool. So let's go. I just want to go real quick to understanding that how do we know? How do we know if we're like actually moving forward on our own emotional intelligence journey? So Daniel Goleman, who wrote a real seminal book called Emotional Intelligence, has 5 components of emotional intelligence. And I'm just going to go through these really quick, and then we're going to hear from each panelist on how do they relate to this? What do they see in themselves? Why does this matter to them in their work? So first one is self-awareness. And this is really foundational. So it's the ability to understand your emotions, just like we started with, what drives you, and the effect that your emotions have on others. So this is about self-awareness, attuning to your emotions and others' emotions. The next one is self-regulation. And this is, in my words, to know when you are in a mood or a habitual way of being or in some level of drama, and to know that this isn't going to help you in your work, and to be able to be someone who people know where you stand, to be trustworthy, to be okay in ambiguity, which we all are, big time, to be able to contain the anxiety of being in the unknown. This is really key for our sector. Okay, the next one is, wait for it. Okay, this is also awesome. Internal motivation. That's another component of emotional intelligence. And what that means is, this is kind of what we referred to before, but rather than looking for external acknowledgement and rewards, you have a sense of curiosity in learning about yourself and discovering more about yourself. And this also contributes to your ability to contribute to your organization. So internal motivation. What are you deeply seeking? What matters to you? Are you in touch with that, or are you just doing your job and wanting to stop there and not looking wholly at what does your whole organization need, not just being in your lane? How can you contribute to your whole organization? The fourth one is empathy. I think that's one that we probably know the most about, but really understanding the emotional makeup of other people. It has to do with how you treat other people, cross-cultural attunement and sensitivity, how you care. Do you have the ability to bring yourself forward to deeply care about people? And then the last one is social skills. So this is, we've all talked about this. Christy really focused on this. Your ability to create and build and attune to relationships, to build rapport. How do you work with colleagues in your team? Do you understand what it is to build a relationship? So that's a lot. And I'm hopeful that it will provide some structure for you. Maybe there's one of these that you were like, wow, I got more work to do on this one. I've got some gaps here. Cool. Why don't you put that in the chat? Like, which of these where you're like, wow, this one really speaks to me. I'd like to do some more work around this. So just put that in the chat while we're hearing from our panelists in any order. what is this for you? Can you speak a little bit about some way that you relate to this, something that you've seen in your own career? Thanks.
Well, I'll kick it off. All of these components of emotional intelligence are important to me. I've worked on them. I continue to work on them. The one that resonates most this morning, and I think for me, it's the starting point, is self-awareness. I'm not here on a panel talking about emotional intelligence because I started my career naturally being aware of my emotions in the moment and knowing how to respond to them. It's taken work over years to increasingly come to notice when I'm feeling fear in the moment, or when I'm really hungry for attention and maybe feel hurt by some feedback I've gotten, or angry because I see something needs to be changed, and looking how to responsibly respond. I think especially about COVID and working for a safety net healthcare system over the last year and a half in particular. I've been there 5 years, but I remember March and April 2020 as vividly as ever, especially because in those moments, all of a sudden our entire fundraising game shifted, our entire focus as a healthcare system shifted, and we were suddenly looking at raising emergency funds for respirators, ventilators, masks. We have a very small but mighty fundraising team of 7. At that point in time, I was one of the directors on the team, and knew that I was really being called on, as was my whole team and my whole organization, to bring resources forward. And I'm grateful that I have been learning and have developed skills to increasingly be with my fear in that moment. Because what I might have done 10, 15 years ago, in some ways, maybe even 5 years ago, would be to get more analytical, get in my head, kind of close off, say, I have to figure this out. I have to have all the answers, kind of that ambiguity. But to first acknowledge, wow, I'm feeling an appropriate level of fear. And then say, okay, how do I use this to motivate myself? How do I use this to actually respond? And how do I make sure that I'm soothing myself, tending to myself, so I can be a place of solidity for my colleagues who are up against much bigger challenges than I am? I tell people I had the easy job in this system, even as we were all being called on to do a lot more. And I'm really grateful for having learned that capacity. And I'm still working on it more and more today. Even this morning in emails that I was sending and in preparation for today's panel, how to be with a level of excitement or anxiety and acknowledge that that's what I'm feeling. That's okay. It's giving me good data. So that hits home.
Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate your vulnerability and how this attunement to yourself was so key in your emotions.
I was going to say, I'm happy to jump in. I think
Great.
similarly to Rachel, it's been quite a bit of a learning experience. And for me, what's been really pivotal in that is that at various points throughout my career, I've been a sex ed teacher. And I think there is no moment of sort of more important self-regulation than when you are working with young people on such a sensitive and sort of formative conversation for them. And I think that it's been such a powerful experience that I have absolutely pulled through the rest of my career. So throughout high school and college, and once I was in my master's program, I was teaching sex ed. It's really, it is, for however long you're in front of that group of young people, you are in improv mode, right? Because you are receiving questions that sometimes are intentionally trying to throw you off your game to sort of push you and see how you're going to relate to them. And you have to be able to self-regulate because you cannot judge them for their questions. You need to be able to read them to understand why they're asking those questions, sort of what's lying underneath that. And I think that experience of having to do that over and over again for so many years put me in a position where when I'm in new meetings and I'm meeting new people, new conversations, new topics, I have like a flexibility to self-regulate, to sort of not be thrown off, but to get really curious about the conversation in a way that I had to with young folks when I'm talking about sex with them. And I think that that for me in my life was really the moments where I felt like I was contributing most and sort of at my best and highest was teaching sex ed. And so I've always tried to get back to that in whatever work I'm doing now, right? And so as I was in the role of funder and building relationships with grantees, I really tried to recreate that curiosity, that deep engagement, incredible presence, right? Really being deeply in the moment with them so that I could build really strong and trusting relationships with them and recreate sort of that bounded relationship where we could really be honest and direct with each other. And I think that without that sort of learning and having to do it over and over again and really learn how to do that self-regulation, I would have been sort of on my heels coming into a situation as a grant maker to sort of build the kind of meaningful relationships that I felt was really necessary to do that work.
That's great. So, Jessica, thank you. And I want to underline something that I heard what you said basically is that you trusted yourself and you created a sense of trust from the people that you were the youth that you were with. And I think that that is a quality. It's a result of emotional intelligence, that you knew what you were there for. You were totally aligned with your mission and your purpose, and people felt that from you, that you were all in for them. And so I think that we can look at, do people trust us? Do they know where we are? Do they know what matters to us? Or are we, again, sort of like robots going through but people don't really know who you are and what matters to you. So that I put in the chat, that word vulnerability. I think that's really important, and it's sort of misperceived that somehow that's a weakness, and I think it's super powerful, and it is what moves people and what moves missions forward. Thank you.
And Jackie, if you want to repost that so everyone can see it, I think some of your chats are going only to the panelists.
Yeah, I just texted Key. I'm like, wait, what?
I think you can pull down and change who it goes to.
Thank you for
Sorry
that.
about that. Okay, I'm going to let Joanne talk.
Okay.
I think so. All of the qualities or the aspects of emotional intelligence, of course, resonate with me. But I'm thinking a lot about the internal motivation piece. When I came into philanthropy, I came in as a fellow. And here I am, maybe on the self-awareness piece, lacking a little bit. I'm just like, oh, I'm just a little fellow, lowercase f. I'm just here to learn some things. But then there's always something in me in each role and job that I've held where I just like, okay, I've gotten enough information. Now it's time to get to work. I have this mission, this internal mission that transcends any job and whatnot. And just to see that, or to feel that, like being in that whirlwind of emotions where I do turn on. And a lot of times I'm powered, we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but a lot of times I'm powered by anger. And it's led to, in my last role, institutional land and people acknowledgement that I facilitated with local natives, and then subsequent investments over $400,000, and then also fighting to get grants that were declined, overturned to approved, and using that anger, I think, to really push me and keep me aligned with the mission that I have internally. I think so just being aware of where I stand in terms of my mission has been really, really helpful in that way. So I'll stop there.
Great. So I think that's another thing I want to underline. So from what Joanne said, he used his anger constructively to generate what he felt was important, and he contributed to his organization's mission and purpose. So again, contrary to what a lot of people think, anger is a very constructive and really important emotion that drives you forward toward what matters. So thank you. Christy, did you want to share anything around this?
I just had a small observation. I think in the chat, when you asked folks, kind of those 5 components you outlined, a lot of folks mentioned internal motivation as being a challenge. And I wonder if that's related to the pandemic of, we've been so isolated, it is hard to kind of keep going and being motivated to, and that intrinsic motivation, you would assume, because we're all kind of in this nonprofit sector, this purpose-driven work, that we would have that. But I think, part of this session is that just because we're in do-gooder work doesn't mean that it's, all rainbows and, unicorns all the time, right? Like it does require that ongoing kind of intrinsic motivation. And sometimes it's hard to come up with that. I think, of course, we would all understand that.
Well, and that I think a lot of us tend to be, I say for me, I'm an idealist. I have a really strong vision for how I would like our culture and our society to be. And well, guess what? It's not. And so like that kind of anger in that way, or sadness or hurt or fear, it's like, where are we going? Like all those emotions are really important. And that drives me to do the work that I do. So yes. Yeah, we want a lot. I hope so. Keep wanting a lot. Okay, cool. So we're gonna John, did you want to say anything?
I was going to say, to Christy's point around Zoom and this virtual environment, I think there's a lot to be said about the lack of connection with people. And I think I draw a lot of, although I am introverted, I draw a lot of energy from being connected with folks. And I think that feeds that internal motivation and also the empathy. So I think that's something we can't discount in this current context.
Yeah. And to build on that, there's a way that we can become sort of victimized by Zoom and all this stuff. And it's really important to watch that, like, okay, well, this is what we have. So how are we going to use this? And I think another piece of emotional intelligence is the way of saying, like resiliency. I need to use the tools that I have to move my mission forward, my organization's mission forward. So I'm not going to cave into like, it's so hard. Well, we're all up against that in different ways. So how are we going to choose to say, I'm going to keep going? It's not going to be easy. I get it. I'm going to keep going. This matters.
I think any way we can, for me, any way I can build in reminders of I'm not alone, huge, foundational. I'm a single woman who lives alone. I go into the office part-time, but even when I'm at one of our hospitals, I'm often in my office by myself, picking up the phone, often on Zoom calls or Microsoft Teams calls. So any reminder I can give myself that other people are, even though we're different, even though our experiences are different, our backgrounds may be different, just every reminder that I can build in of I'm not alone in having feelings, feeling what I'm feeling, longing for contact, longing for connection, often being frustrated. I think that's foundational, at least for me.
Good. Yeah, I think so. And the quality of knowing and creating community for yourself, even if it's picking up the phone and calling somebody and talking about, what your own emotions, like that's a way of soothing, like soothing yourself, because we all have a lot of feelings these days. I really hope. So what I said before about recognizing the aliveness inside of you. All those feelings are your aliveness. And I think our work is to become increasingly alive. And that's why that term continual development, mission drive, whatever it is, like that, let's all keep becoming alive because we have a lot of work to do. So, all right, so let's move now to in our planning discussion, there was a lot of energy around times when Joanne, I think you started this and you actually reference it here already, but like when has one emotion, one strong emotion led you to action in a way that you see that you had an impact and you may have needed to sort of get over your worries about you're too much or you're going to get in trouble or this isn't going to be well received or people won't like me, but you chose to move forward because of your mission. That's a very high level of emotional intelligence.
I can
Great.
start here. Yeah. So I was working on an initiative called Advancing Health Equity Through Housing through my last organization, and myself and the team had made a number of recommendations for grants to be made. Had done all of our vetting. We had received way more applications than we could fund, so we had to do some really serious vetting and whatnot. And so what we ended up with were the cream of the crop in terms of what we wanted to do and who we wanted to touch. Fast forward to the feedback from the docket, and pretty much all of our grants got declined. And at first I'm like, yeah, we're not above critique. So I'm reading through, I'm like, yeah, let me see what the rationale is. So I'm reading through, and on one of the recommendations that I wrote, the decline was because we were already working with other racial and ethnic minorities in this community. And so why would we need to work with this Puerto Rican population, displaced Puerto Rican population? And in that moment, I just felt, someone asked in the chat a little bit earlier, how did I channel my anger? Or they asked that in general. And in this moment, I felt fire. I felt tokenism really screaming very loud in that moment. And it's not, I'm Black, I don't have Puerto Rican in me, so it's really the empathy speaking to me, and so I really sat in the moment and really figured out why I was angry. My teammates, luckily, also were very upset. So we were able to huddle and talk about what it is that we saw and why it was problematic. And so we got really clear on our words, and we ended up having a conversation with the president. It was supposed to be just the manager of our team, but then the whole team just huddled up and we all called in. And I remember being so nervous and anxious, but also on fire, still in the room as I listened. And I spoke up, and I made my case, but then I also asked a question, because a lot of times we're often made to prove our point, but I turned it and I was like, oh, can you tell me why this is the case? Like, why doesn't this fall within our mission? If the need is there, why are we not meeting it? We vetted it in a number of ways. And long story short, all of those grants ended up being overturned after that conversation. And it was just a matter of fighting and sticking with, so it's like courage, integrity, and just sticking with yourself and trusting yourself in those moments of anger and getting words, because you can be a what do you call it, a bull in a glass shop. You can damage some things with anger if you're not careful. But I think in that moment we did a really good job. And I give myself a lot of credit for doing a really good job of getting clear about why I was angry, sitting with it long enough to come up with words to use in a way that I didn't have to raise my voice. I was just able to ask questions. I was able to bring my perspective.
This is great. So I'm going to use this. So I want you all to get, this is a number of skills that Yuan used to be successful. So I think it's helpful to break it down. So you were able to identify your emotion. I am angry. I am dissatisfied with this situation. And being dissatisfied is really like a key, like ask yourself, am I satisfied here or am I not satisfied? And if I'm not satisfied, another skill would be then, well, what am I going to do? What can I do to achieve the outcome that I want? So that's another skill, like look forward, tracking, like, here's the outcome that I'm looking for. How am I going to get there? And how am I going to use my relationship skills to build trust, relationship with these people that initially have said no? Like, all of those are very high level skills that if we choose to, we can keep developing. That's so important. These are all things that are learnable. It's like building muscles. You practice. You just practice. You take risks and you're willing to go. Juwan said also, I am scared. I felt fear to speak up. Good. I mean, most people say, well, then I shouldn't speak up. That's not true at all. The fear means that you're out there, you're taking a risk, and you're speaking what's so for you. Being genuine. Fear is fine. Of course you would feel fear. You're at risk. But it matters to you, and you make a choice to speak in the face of the fear. The fear is fine. I think we need to reinterpret fear in our culture. It means you see a possibility for something that matters to you and you're going after it. You should be scared. That's fine. That's part of what coaching is about too. How do you deal with that? That's fine. Love it. Okay, great. So what about others panelists? Do you have examples of this that you could share?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. I think similarly to Joanne, like clarity of purpose has been a real driver for me in this work and is where I sort of find my center. So I think that one of the skills that has really benefited me as a woman of color who has primarily worked and learned in predominantly white spaces is my ability for self-regulation. But I do think like you can self-regulate to the point of sort of passiveness. And so it's where that sort of ability for self-reflection becomes so important to say, have I let the things that are angering me actually just sort of be tamped down for the sake of functioning in a space? And I had that moment where folks may remember about 5 or 6 years ago, Ken Griffin made a pretty significant donation to the University of Chicago Crime Lab to benefit a program that at its core increases surveillance in some communities of color. And at that time, I was a program officer at the Joyce Foundation and gun violence prevention, and really in conversations on a regular basis with community about sort of what did it mean to reduce violence and what were the tools that were being used and sort of what were the implications of those tools. And this happened within weeks of the Starbucks incident, where we were really talking about what does it mean to have police surveillance and how does that impact the movement of people of color in their own communities. And I was pretty fired up about the conversation around this investment. And I think for a while, I just sort of regulated, right? Like this happens and there's not a lot I can do about that, but I'm angry about it. And I need to be a part of this conversation. And so I ended up writing an op-ed that was published in Cranes. And my intent was not to criticize the donation or to criticize the strategy, but to ask the question, if this is an effective strategy, if surveillance is an effective strategy, once violence is reduced, then what? Does it present us with an opportunity to invest more deeply in communities so that we don't see a return in violence and so that that surveillance can be removed? But it was a big risk. And it's one that like put me in some jeopardy, right? Because like I question an institution that has a lot of power and a lot of respect. I'm a Black woman in philanthropy, like that is not the most secure position to be in. And so I do think it's that balance of how can I use the platform that I have? Where do I have some power and can I acknowledge that? And when I am in a position where I am so angry that I can't self-regulate, how am I going to harness that anger? And I do think, right, big risk, but like big opportunity to sort of stay true to my purpose, right? And I think for me, like the relief that came from that moment of being able to say, like, I want to be able to question and be in a position to question sort of the bigger consequences of some of the work that we're doing in philanthropy and what the long-term impacts of that work was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up because I would not have been able to self-regulate past it.
This is great. I'm inspired by all of this. I hope you all are. What is your version of this? All right, let's do it. Let's use the chat. What is your version of this? What is something that you intend to leave here and take a step forward in speaking up about, talking to your team about, your leadership about? Where are you dissatisfied and you want to see change? And you will step forward, whatever that looks like. Let's use the chat. Love this. We are revolutionaries. Okay.
As people are putting comments in the chat, I'd like to offer an example about a different emotion. And before I dive in, Juan and Jessica, oh my goodness. Like I'm moved, I'm inspired, I'm stirred up. Wow. Such powerful examples of harnessing your anger and your fear. There's another emotion that I'd like to speak to, which is the power of self-affirmation in the face of hurt. And this is so powerful for fundraisers, and I don't think we talk about this enough. And I think this is powerful for all of humanity, but of course my lens is as a fundraiser. As a fundraiser, we get told no all the time. And sometimes often we get told no by donors or not yet by donors. Often we'll be told no, or we'll need to work to win the support of our colleagues internally within organizations and our communities. And I've been fortunate to have such incredible support and such incredible support for Sinai, such incredible support for me personally. But there have been times, and it can be as simple as being on a Zoom call and getting blank faces, which I'm not getting at all from my fellow panelists this morning. So this is a really lovely experience. But being on a Zoom and getting blank faces, or getting feedback from a leader or a donor or a boss that's often right on, but not necessarily what I want to hear. And I think of, as in particular, an experience earlier in my career where I was working with a leader in an organization, and this particular leader said something that just hit me in my gut, such that after the conversation, I went into my office, I went to collect myself. And in the past, what I might have done is feel sorry for myself or deflected. What this leader said wasn't important, but thanks to the training I've been doing, I use that as an opportunity to let myself feel the hurt. I actually called a close friend who I could speak to in confidentiality and just say, I feel really hurt right now. And what I was doing was I was actually using the skills that I've been learning of acknowledging my feeling and affirming myself, because we're not always going to get affirmation from other people. But by building the skills that I'm continuing to build and will build my entire life of learning how to affirm myself, like I'm able to take greater risks. I'm able to take feedback better than I've ever taken feedback. I've had certain leaders tell me that I respond with so little defensiveness in certain moments, they're impressed. And I'm like, that was not me 10 years ago. So this is awesome. And what's cool is the more that I learn how to be with that hurt and affirm myself, or reach out to others for affirmation. And sometimes that affirmation is as simple as, yes, I hear you. Like, not like you were right, but like, yes, I hear you. It actually helps strengthen me so I can go out and do the next thing. So it's of a different nature than some of the other examples we've heard, but actually, in what Juan and Jessica each said, I hear examples of them affirming themselves as well in the face of potential hurt. So I think I could go on and on, but I think it's been very powerful for me.
So this is great, Rachel. Thank you. And you're also, leading to a pathway that I think we can all use for ourselves, which is when you said self-affirmation in the face of hurt. a lot of times this is hard. Well, the work that we do is hard, and I often myself, I've taken on this practice of like when I know I'm like down or I'm like in my own victimhood or this is so hard, I'll like, wait, what are 5 positives from today? What are 5 things that I did that I can acknowledge about myself that I contributed to? I led this, da da da. I mean, like, so we can do that for each other. We can call a friend or a colleague and say, I need some motivation here. I'm really challenged right now. It could be I'm really scared to move forward. I'm hurt. I'm angry. I'm sad. Even celebrating. Like we do a lot of celebrating in our organization because we need to be doing that when we have even small wins because that helps you now move to the next challenge. So those are all, again, these are all skills that we can do on our own if we are introverts or with others. Okay, so we're going to move now to another area that we circled on as a group in our panel discussion, which is about relationship building. And certainly whether we are in foundations, nonprofits, if we're consultants, if we're working in community, government, whatever, relationship building is so important. And so I thought it would be cool to hear for you all in the audience to hear a little bit about different panelists' take on how does emotional intelligence relate to leadership? How does knowing yourself relate to building relationships? How does being able to put yourself in the shoes of other people enhance your ability to lead your mission?
So I have an example, Jackie, of building relationships, and it's one I wanted to share because it is centered at Forefront. So, it seems appropriate for today. So I am part, and probably folks in the audience too, are members of a group we call CCAPS, the College and Career Access, Persistence, and Success group. And so this started, through one of the member issue groups at Forefront around education funding. But, we've been together now for quite a few years as a learning community. And one of the benefits of Forefront generally is that it is both grant makers and grant seekers in the same space. But I think the CCAPS group has really taken that to a new level of genuinely collaborating on things like, we tried coming up with a common tool for like, what are the metrics around college and career success? Like, what does a 6-year graduation rate mean? Like, let's get into that nitty gritty or, and so it has really gone, I think, beyond the transactional nature of some of us are grant seeking and some of us are grant making, and has created a community where, on the one hand, some of the grant seekers, it could seem that they are competitors, right? And, there's our scarce resources and, the need always outstrips the demand, or the demand always outstrips the supply of funds. But, by coming together, I think we hopefully created a productive community. I often advise folks, because it's a very vibrant space in Chicago. There's so much going on around college and career success. So there are a lot of nonprofits, there are a lot of funders, and because it's a learning community, anyone can come and join. And I think it's, an easy bar, a low bar to, come, attend some of the, now, of course, everything has been on Zoom. And so it is more fun when we can be in person, but, participate in the chat, participate in, offer up your own expertise and intellectual capital, because that's how we all learn together. We're all, and I have seen nonprofits who built really strong relationships with funders that way by bringing their genuine expertise about the sector, because a lot of us are generalists, right? I'm at a small family foundation. We have 4 staff, and we fund across a lot of different education areas. This is just one of them. So I do really rely on, and of course, we believe the expertise is in the community and in the folks who are doing the work. And so that has been a genuine way for us to build these kinds of relationships, and including, we ended up founding a new nonprofit, the Partnership for College Completion together. As I said, some of these kind of common reporting and tools that we now use. So that was just an example I wanted to share. And thanks to Forefront for being our home for that.
Yay. Thank you so much for sharing that, Christy. And that's, people going beyond their individual silos and traditional bounds and systems and really aligning around mission and what are we here to do and to create together. It's a beautiful example. Any others?
I was gonna say, I feel like we had a good conversation about that transition from Grantseeker to Grantmaker. And I know that Rachel, you're so aware of this emotional transition where like you've learned something in your experience and sort of how you were treated and approached when you were seeking grants that you pull forward and how do you become a grant maker. And for me personally, I think that I had experienced so much opaqueness with philanthropy and just sort of a lack of clarity about when we move forward and how we move forward and sort of what my relationship was to the whole system, that when I became a grant maker, it was so critical to me that I be as open about what was happening, as direct about what was happening as I could be. I think maybe to the point of making some of my peers a little uncomfortable about just how direct I was about here's the power I have and here's the power I don't have. And here's where I can be useful and here are my points of leverage. And here's what's out of my hands that I really can't control, but I'll be just like direct with you about where that lives. Because I do think coming into a foundation as I did without experience in the sector, a lot of what I did was try to learn and build power and build relationships so that I could be transparent about the work that I was doing. And I think that that just sort of openness helped me build those trusting relationships, right? Because people knew that I was just going to be as clear as I possibly could about what was happening so that we could maintain our relationship regardless of the funding decision. And I think that sort of going through that process has like elevated that, and just how I want to build relationships in general is just to be able to like name power in relationships and where it sits and sort of what my role is in that, to talk about where I have privilege and where it's sort of outside of my control. And I do think it's changed the dynamic of how I'm able to build relationships with people. Because I think as we were talking about earlier, people know when and how to come to me and sort of where those boundaries are because I've been so clear about them at the top.
This is great. Being able to set boundaries, to say no, to I often talk to people that I'm working with and consulting with. It's like being someone that is, you respect yourself or being someone who's liked. Like, which would you rather be? And sometimes it involves making the choice that what I'm going to say, I know some people won't like, but I'd rather be respecting myself than be a pleaser. And that's for those of us who are introverts and externally oriented, it's like that's a choice. I think that's a message that I'd like everyone to also consider is we all have choices. We have choices at every moment to speak up or to not speak up. Okay, good. So I have like 3 or 4 questions that I really want to get asked and for the audience to hear your responses to, and I also want to have audience question time. So I'm gonna just I'm just gonna go through these questions, and if one of you has like, I really want to answer this question, great, and then we'll see how far we can get, and then we'll open it up to audience questions about 10:10. Okay, does that work for people? Okay, emotion check. Put your emotions in the chat. What are you feeling? Hurt, angry, joy, scared, sad, or any combination. This is great. You could be doing this. I give my coaching clients assignments to chart their feelings on a little post-it note. Write them down. Fear, hurt, angry, sadness, joy, and then like how many times when you feel one in the day. It's training yourself to be attuned to your emotions. This is key, and it can actually be fun. Learning about yourself. We're learning about ourselves. Okay, cool. So I'm going to ask this question now. Okay, cool. What is something that you all have learned either as a grant seeker or a grant maker that you would offer to the grant seekers in the audience so that they can be more emotionally intelligent and effective in their work? So all three of you have been grant seekers who've gone to grant makers, and Rachel herself is a grant. So I want you to, the audience to glean as much as possible. What do they need to know? Yeah.
I'll just say, it is a fine line, and it takes a lot of emotional intelligence to walk that line between building a genuine relationship and being, sycophantic and, unnecessarily, obsequious. Like, that's just not necessary. And so I think, building relationships takes time, and it is harder, I think, in this virtual world than when we could be in person. But I often give folks advice, like, they want to know, like, should they reach out to our board members or things like that? And, generally the answer is no. I mean, the reason they employ professional staff is because we have a process. And, especially when I was at a place like Boeing, folks would ask, like, can I just, reach out to that executive? Well, if one of your board members has a genuine relationship with that, executive at Boeing, of course they should make a connection. Like, that's being a good board member. That's the kind of thing. But, don't think that that's like sort of going around the grant making process, right? Like, luckily at a place like Boeing, we had pretty good communication where anyone who got one of those inquiries knew to kind of then funnel it through our department. But I do think, unfortunately, sometimes it crosses a line into, just unnecessary. And that's actually why I put in the chat that thing about having a good internal gyroscope. I think probably a lot of you have heard this, and I did kind of experience this when you become a grant maker, that you have had your last bad meal and your last honest compliment. And there is some truth to that.
Great. Thank you, Christy. Any others? What would you say to the, by the way, I just want to say, I was thinking about this, the whole terminology for grant seekers and grant makers. I'm like, this is so transactional. You're either giving money or you're getting money. Maybe we should like rename this whole paradigm. Okay.
Yeah, so I was going to say, similar to Christy, my jokes have never been as funny as when I was a program officer. And that's a really strange experience. And I think that sort of what's missing in that, and so directly to your point, Jackie, of so often thinking about it as grant seeker, grant maker, is that grant makers have other leverage points than just their grants, and they tend to be relationships with other key decision makers. And grantees have so much opportunity for teaching if they're open to that relationship with grant makers. I really felt as a grant maker, the work I did was only as good as the relationships I held, because I was no longer a practitioner. And so I really needed and relied on my relationships with folks to inform the way I did my grant making. And so for all of the folks who showed up to teach me, right, which is a big ask, but to teach me and to shape the way that I did my grant making, I'm still so appreciative of that. And so I think it allowed me to leverage the assets and the resources that I had so differently, because folks in community were willing to show up and teach me and push me, and it really did influence the way I did the work. So I think to think about the full breadth of that relationship, and even if you're not necessarily getting the funding you were looking for, the way that you can influence a grant maker that actually changes not just your relationship with them, but the way they do their work moving forward.
It's great. Beautiful. Anyone else, or I will go to my next question.
I'll just add,
Great.
totally agree with Christy and Jessica, very much respect that. I do want to also add, it is legal to enjoy your relationships with your donors. And I know for some people on the chat that are in the attendee list, that's going to come naturally. You naturally do that, especially if you're more extroverted. If you tend toward more analytical and you're worried about getting it right, use that, harness that, be highly sensitive to the balance that your program officers are holding. But it's totally legal to enjoy those relationships. And I think that contributes to partnerships as well. But laugh at the jokes if they're genuine. So.
Okay, I love it. People are people. We're all human. We're all human in this together, ideally. Okay, I'm gonna move on because this question is very important to me. How does one's awareness of racial equity and inequity, systemic racism, white supremacy dovetail with being an emotionally intelligent person? And I want to give a shout out to Chicago Women in Philanthropy that I'm board chair of, because it is really through the work leading the racial equity and social justice work that I have come to recognize myself as a white person who has a lot of responsibility to change the way that our country was founded on racism and continues the system, and to challenge that and speak up about it. So that's why this question is in here.
I think they are just so inextricably linked. Emotional intelligence or just having that self-awareness and racial equity analysis. We're working, context matters, right? So we're working in the United States of America. There's a history that we were not taught, honestly. It came from a white perspective. And unless you're doing the work to really dig in and investigate ways in which the story wasn't told in its whole, in its full and honest way, it's hard to really see yourself. And I feel like there's a lot of, in philanthropy especially, which is a system that is built off of all of these things, this extractive capitalism. And you think about who the founders of these philanthropies were and how they acquired their wealth. And you realize that one of the things that I struggled with was, I'm a part of this system now. How do I make sure I'm at least doing what I can? I know that to live and work in this economy, I'm a part of the structural racism and I'm contributing in some ways, but how can I push at some point or at every point that I can see? And I think just staying aware of myself, especially as a Black gay man, so many other identities too, but just being aware of how this system wasn't built for me, and how do I ensure that I make it easier for the next person. Like I did a lot of work with Native communities in honor of equity. How do I make sure that we're not just here going with emotion in a perfunctory matter? How do we change? How do we bring some transformation? How do we transform ourselves and transform the world? And I think a lot of what I notice, especially in philanthropy, is that we tend to look outward a lot. Like, oh, we want to change this world, and we want to do it through these grants. And we forget to look at this system that's going on, the microsystem, and analyzing where do these things happen, and having that self-awareness and honestly, the courage, because it's going to change a lot. You've been in a role, especially in leadership, if you've been in a role and you've presented yourself in one way, and now you've been presented with information that is a threat to the way that you presented yourself and the way that you do the work, your confidence comes into question. And there are so many leaders that just hold on so tightly to that, to their way of being, not realizing that there's so much more opportunity to be an even stronger leader when you lean into vulnerability. People connect with you, your staff connect with you in a deeper way. And so I think it's a real disservice when we aren't self-aware, especially given the context and the nature of this country in which we're working.
Thank you, Joanne. Super powerful. Others?
As a white woman and a white leader in an organization, I think it's important for those of us who are white or identify as white to realize it's our responsibility to do our own work around our own internalized racism. And I think that's where emotional intelligence is important. I notice where I feel fear as the topic comes up. Even so, it's important for me to acknowledge that And rather than avoid the conversation, go, okay, this is mine to look at, to notice where I may feel hurt or where I may go to defensiveness, and go, that's my reaction. That doesn't mean that I get to stay there. And I hold it's my responsibility as a leader to take on this work, and I don't get it right all the time. I'd like to think that I'm moving in the right direction, but I think it's an important topic in this conversation, and especially for those of us who've benefited from the system that we're in.
Thank you, Rachel. Any other comments, Christy or Jessica? Okay. All right, so this is, oh boy, okay. I'm gonna ask this last question while you all put your questions in the chat, because I think we sort of teed up to this point. Joanne, you especially. So, you know, what is working well about the system of philanthropy and what is not working well? And put questions while this question is being responded to, anyone who would like to.
I'll jump in really quickly. I'll just say I have the same answer to both of those questions, and it's the roots in the lack of accountability. So what's not working well is that there is a lack of accountability to community. Most of the way it goes up, the accountability goes up to the board, and there's just so much privilege, especially in larger institutional philanthropy, that we often end up being out of touch. But then there's also lack of accountability, or maybe just like there's this freedom to invest how we see fit. Like the rules, like you just need to at least spend 5% of your endowment to maintain your status as a nonprofit. And yet we are stuck in many ways with a certain way of doing things. And so I don't think we maximize that freedom that we're given in terms of grant making as on the funder perspective.
Thanks, Joanne. Are there any other responses? And
Yeah, I'm happy to weigh in. As I say, Jackie, big questions as we come to the end of the conversation.
we gotta ask them. We gotta think about them. Otherwise, we're part of the system.
I do think, and not to say that this is new, but I do think it is different because of the sort of technology and social media and everything else that we have. But I do think that what's really important for sort of all opaque systems is for them to become more transparent and for there to be sort of more public dialogue, conversation, and involvement. And I do think that what we've seen over the past 18 to 20 months, right, as philanthropy has made some really significant public commitments to racial equity, is more public conversation about what that means. And I think that that's really important for having that inside-outside game of philanthropy. So for folks who are on the inside of philanthropy, who have the opportunity or the power or the privilege to start to move philanthropy differently or to change who's involved and what it looks like, it's so important that there's also that public dialogue that lends itself to an analysis of what is this sector, how does it work, that questions the way this sector works. And certainly this is not the first time that it's happened. I'm a bit of a geek about philanthropy. If you look back to sort of the beginnings of philanthropy, there were the same conversations, same op-eds about what is the role of philanthropy, particularly in government and making decisions about politics and what happens if funders are able to engage in those systems. I think it's such an important conversation that we're having again, and sort of social media and sort of public access to information is so different now that I think more people can be a part of that conversation. And it's so important for us to harness that momentum of engagement and make sure that we don't lose that. And sort of we continue to have a public dialogue and questioning about how philanthropy works and who's funded and how are they funded and what are the consequences of philanthropy being engaged in our various systems?
Thank you, Jessica.
That's so great. This is Christy. I am so sorry. My computer totally froze. I don't know if you're still seeing me on the other screen, I mean, I
No, we
moved
can see you
offices
now.
actually. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm on my phone now. Hopefully, I'm not too much, but I mean, Jessica and Joanne's responses were terrific. I just want to say one thing I think that is working in philanthropy are the genuine relationships that have been built. And I think we
Christy, maybe it's just me or
clearly
others.
exemplified when the pandemic started, and we just already sorry, connection isn't good enough. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, why don't you put it in the chat? I started to hear and we want to hear what you have to say because I've heard you speak about this and it's very moving and powerful. Rachel, do you want to speak to this?
Boy, I mean, I would echo so much of what Jessica and Joanne just said. And what I started to hear Christy Uchida say about genuine relationships, I think that's what I heard. I do agree that that exists in many quarters. You know, one of the things that I think is inherent in philanthropy is it's built on a model where we are incentivized to be really competitive with each other. And I think that's a feature of philanthropy. And I think in some ways it forces us to stay on our edge. When I'm working with my team, we model a lot of our momentum on, all right, how many dials are you going to make? How many meetings are you going to have with donors? Really looking at how are we going to hit our goals and, how are we going to compete with our own best? And I've had wonderful collaborations with other organizations where we've really come together around a mission that's been very much increasingly part of Sinai's model. And it's still so challenging. And I don't have an easy answer for it. I think in some ways it works well. And in other ways, I think it really holds us back in achieving our missions. So I don't have an easy answer for that. I think it's just an inherent bind in what we do. And, we're trying to navigate it as well as we know now at this point in time.
Thank you, Rachel. All right, well, it sounds like SS is saying, how can we take steps to become grantors like this amazing panel? And I'm not sure if the emphasis is on who they are and how can we be more like them or how to be a grantor. But if there's anything that anyone wants to say about this, I would also look for you, SS, about what is it that you're seeking to contribute to? And do you have to be a grantor to move that mission forward? Is there something that, you can do not being a grantor from right where you are? So just a thought, not just a thought, that's a thought. So any thoughts on any of the emphasis of that question?
Well, I'll speak as somebody who at various points in my career said, well, maybe I should move into philanthropy. And I decided that I think it's a lot easier for somebody like me to stay on the fundraising side in that I get to move unabashedly, unconflictedly on behalf of my organization's mission. And I choose my organizations well so I can really invest. I see fundraising and working with our Grantmaker partners as a way to drive change in organizations, help us become sharper, help us become better. And I think that's why the partnerships I've built with key donors, when they've worked really well, that's why I think they've worked very well. I don't have an answer on how to take the exact career paths that my fellow panelists have. But I would advocate that being on the grant seeking side, if you're looking at it through the potential for change and being a positive change agent, there's a lot of potential here on this end. And really, a lot of opportunity for partnership.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. And I put in the chat as far as how to become more emotionally intelligent. This blog, I think, will be helpful. Will give people things to focus on, as well as things that we talked about tracking your emotions. Maybe you give yourself an assignment, like each day I'm going to pick one emotion and use it to drive me forward, whether it's sadness, hurt, anger, fear, or joy. You know, create assignments for yourself that move you more deeply into attuning to yourself and moving it out toward your mission. Any other questions? You all have to have more questions. Emotionally intelligent people are always like never satisfied with just, okay, that's good enough. They're like, what else can I learn? What else should I be thinking of? So I'm going to encourage you to write your questions in the chat. And also I will announce the next philanthropy club for if you're not familiar, the philanthropy club is a once a month convening gathered through Forefront, and it's the first Tuesday of the month as it is today. Actually, it's not that for today because of Labor Day, but usually the first Tuesday of the month. So the next one is going to be on October 5th, and Key will be putting a link to the topic in the chat, and I have to find my notes. Hello, too many screens open. Oh my gosh, Key, can you put that in the, here it is. Okay, so the topic for next month is the truth about the City of Chicago TIFs and the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund. So that's TIFs, Tax Increment Financing, and the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund is NOF. So that's going to be, we hope to see you back on October 5th, again, 9 to 10:30. Oh, great. Key, thank you for putting that into the chat. Okay, cool. We got some questions. Anya, thank you so much for participating. I really struggle with recognizing my own level of power and therefore level of responsibility and ability to affect change at my organization. How do the panelists assess that from yourself? Recognizing your own level of power and capacity to affect change. I mean, I would say you do. You have power and you have the ability to affect change, and it's your intention to do that, even if it's messy and you don't know exactly what you're doing. You have that capacity, Anya. And I know you, so I can say that too.
As I say, I'm happy to talk about that a little because I have also struggled with that and understanding sort of what is my sort of best and highest contribution to like a situation. And Jackie, I know this is something that we've talked about, but I think feedback is so important. I've had other people do sort of 360 reviews for me so that I can get that feedback about like, what am I doing that's been impactful? What's been effective? Because I do think it can be very hard in our own self-reflection to understand the impact that we're having on other people or having in a sector, in a space without collecting that feedback from others. And I think even to the point of understanding like, what really makes me light up, right? Like that's one of the questions that I had asked of friends and of coworkers, because sort of narrowing in on what is it that I'm most passionate about, sort of I have a sense of that, but how is that reflected in others and how do they see that is such valuable feedback. And so I am certainly one who feels that way also, and that really that question resonates with me, and I have found it so helpful to engage in those conversations and just to get that kind of honest feedback from folks about where they see me as useful, where they see me as an important contributor to work, to understand where my power lies in the work that I'm doing.
This is great.
I would add,
Go ahead, Juan.
I too have done a 360 review, and I just remember reading it and just being like, oh my gosh, people see me in a way different light. They give me much more credit than I give myself. So I think, Anya, you're probably not giving yourself enough credit, number one. Number two, I think it's important to do this work in community, whether that's inside your organization or outside of your organization. I found a lot of folks that I just like can go to in moments where I do feel like, I feel stuck. I don't know what to do, that are outside of my organization, that are able to kind of give me an outside view, a little bit less biased view of myself and my role in the organization. And I think that has been really, really, really helpful. So I would definitely figure out who, like in conferences or on this panel, who you might want to just check in with and build relationship with so that you can sustain all the goodness that you have inside you.
That's great. And I think a lot of it is for all of us, we don't accurately see ourselves. And we're sort of laboring under, beliefs, and this is, I mentioned the right foundation, beliefs that we have about ourselves that we came by really early on, and we live in those beliefs, and they become, in many ways, they could become self-fulfilling prophecies, and they limit us moment by moment. Am I going to speak up? Well, I'm not good enough. So that's really the work. A lot of the work is to challenge those, to be aware of the beliefs that you have and challenge them. And that's where feedback is so important. I'm so glad that you mentioned this, Jessica and Joanne, because we only know what we know, but we need others who can also hold vision and know that we have much more in us than we see. So, Rachel, do you have anything, or Christy, to bring us home with this?
There's a concept, and I don't remember the theorist, but a concept called the law of little things. I'll have to look it up afterwards. If anyone wants to email me, I'll let you know. But the idea is that the Mississippi River was not built in a day. The Grand Canyon was not built in a day. Well, maybe it was. I don't actually know my geology that well. But the concept being, we don't increase our ability to influence and our ability to really be powerful and leverage power just all in one fell swoop. It's looking at how can I make contact with one person on the Zoom screen or one person in the room where we can come to some agreement. What is the next truth that I need to say? What is the next moment that I need to affirm myself so I can take the next risk? So I very much relate to what Anya said and what my fellow panelists have shared from my own journey, and just really hold that this is a lifelong journey. And yeah, and there are so many options for us as we go through our lives.
That's great. So thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. I think that that's a great note to end on, that, we all have so much more in us. And I hope that our missions, whatever that looks like, call us to do this work of developing ourselves and our potential, and to contribute more to community and to world, because we sure need it. So thank you all so much. It's been great to be with you. I wish we could just wave for now, because we know you're there. Thank you again for coming, and hope to see you on October 5th back here. Bye-bye.